In Fra Angelico's time, it was a common practice to paint rich clothes behind the Virgin Mary, Jesus, and saints. Did the painters copy real fabrics? Generally not. The richest fabrics woven in silk and gold were too expensive for painters to buy, but they knew well how they appeared. Florentine painters could see them in the best workshops and the workshop of the weavers of the town and in ecclesiastical vestments and altar frontals in churches. In the most important churches, on liturgical occasions, priests celebrated Mass in precious attire in silk and gold, often woven with symbolic designs. These opulent vestments were meant only for the glory of God. They were so precious that priests used them for many, many years, sometimes centuries, when these fabrics were no more produced. Therefore, painters had good knowledge of the current production, looking at the workshops, but also of the old one. They could take note of the motifs and colors in order to reproduce something similar in their works. No wonder if they chose to represent divine personages, angels and saints, clothed in the old textiles they saw in churches, rather than dressed or surrounded in fabrics up to date, unless they had specific significance. The fabrics painted by Fra Angelico to honor his Madonna and Child until the 30th years of the 15th century actually appear old fabrics. That is to say that not the best or the richest fabrics produced in the first decades of the 15th century by the silk manufacturers of Tuscany. They show interlaced tendrils, stylized flowers, and birds. Well, you have seen, this is some detail in the Museum of San Marco in Florence and Annunciation. The other one was in Pisa, and the first in l'Ermitage. The production of the second half of the 14th century, a production which is one of the most interesting phenomena in the textile history, was full of this kind of design. Birds, especially phoenixes, to remind of resurrection, but also dogs, symbol of faith, lions, symbol of the sun, the divine light, eagles, messengers between sky and earth, sometimes fighting with boars, panthers, also with dragons, all symbol of evil. The weaving of this patterned silks required very sophisticated looms and professional weavers. The most famous were the Lucchese weavers, but they, since the beginning of the 14th century, emigrated to Florence, Bologna, Venice, and Genoa from Lucca, where they enjoyed of important privileges for their skill and the empowering of the local silk manufacturers. Florentine bankers soon understood the silk was the business of the future and invested in it. At the end of the century, Florence exported its precious silk of all over Europe and even in the East, in the many foreign countries and the courts. But it took weeks to weave, especially when some or many areas of the motif were brocaded, almost always in gold. Brocading is a technique similar to an embroidery made while weaving, a very slow work which increased the cost of the fabric, but allowed to use many different colors or wefts with magnificent effect. In the oldest specimens, the gold thread was made by a thin membrane gilded with gold powder. Now they appear oxidized. The bird is oxidized. But in the second half of the 14th century and in the following centuries, the gold thread was generally made by a very thin and narrow lamella of gold, twisted on a silk core, which gave a real splendor to the fabric. So many and always different were the motifs woven in the silk in the 14th century that the phenomenon allowed the painters to reproduce personal interpretations of this kind of textiles, as the paintings of the time clearly testify. For example, the Bottega of the Cione in Florence used the same textile design for many different paintings. Like this one, for example, are all the details, of course, and this one, o l'Accademia di Firenze, Galleria della Carmenia. Scripts are frequent in this production, many in Kufic of Arabic character, revealing a foreign inspiration, Spanish or of the Middle East. Also, Fra Angelico uses letters. Also, Angelico uses letters, especially in the woven embroidery borders of the dresses of the angels or the Madonna, like in Detroit, the Annunciation in Detroit Institute of Art. Often, when the angel arrives to announce her destiny, the Virgin is represented sitting with the golden cloth of honor behind her. This is the Annunciation in San Giovanni Valdarno. It seems that Angelico was not worried at all about the reproduction of real textiles. He painted the same simple geometric design in different paintings, a theory of circles divided into 4, 6, or 8 sections. Like in this case, the same in the cushion, the same different paintings, but the same design. I don't know if you can read the scripts, but this one in the Thyssen, the other one in the San Marco Museum, and in the Tabernacolo dei Linaioli, where there are many different kind of textiles. And this textile become flower more or less clear. Maybe it was the chosen technique to dictate this simple design, which we haven't knowledge of in a real produced fabric, At my knowledge, at least, none of this kind survived. Actually, the motif was not so important. Important was the glittering of gold, the divine light of heaven. But which were the most precious fabrics in the Angelico time? It was a time where a relative new kind of fabric was acquiring a great success all over Europe, and not only. A fabric with unique and extraordinary features, the velvet. Velvet can be reached by many different effects. It can be plain, without any design, patterned, like in this case, sometimes brocaded with gold, like in this case. It has three-dimensional plastic dimension, sometimes with 2 and 3 highness of the pile. Its ground can be covered by cold threads. Brocading wefts can make glitter in the smooth surface of the pile. What you can see now is not brilliant, but the ground is all covered of gold. Real gold, of course, not something like that. The gold thread can be lifted in boucle effect. Oh, this is a technique incredible, very, very, very slow to weave. And there is another problem. The brocading weft were generally, and always, were woven on the reverse of the fabric. The weaver has the reverse fabric in front of him, while in the velvet, he must cut the pile during the weaving, and so he must brocade with his hand, make a natural movement, and so the work is very, very slow, and the cost very, very high. For example, per a velvet like this, they can weave only 4 or 5 centimeters each day. The costs were very, very high, like to buy a Ferrari today, see? Like something like that. Ho perso il filo. Allora, piles, another feature, piles of different colors creates different polychrome effects. In the Angelico's time, velvet was well appreciated as the most precious textile on the market. It was originally imported to Italy from the East since 2 centuries. This one, for example, was one of great success in the 14th century. The golden dots have the same dimension of the Florentine golden coins, the florins. This velvet became the coat of arms of the Florentine Arte del Cambio, the Bankers' Guild. We can find it still in some pictures of the time of Angelico. But is not this one the motif that the 15th century wove and elaborated most? The pomegranates, as a religious symbol of resurrection and eternal life, was the central motif of the luxurious patterned velvet of the 15th century since its beginning. The pomegranates sometimes feature singly and sometimes in a group of 3, an allusion to the Holy Trinity. The subject was elaborated into a different kind of design. One simpler, symmetrical, and another one more complex, richer of elements and significance. In this more lavish version, the principal element of the motif is a large tree trunk with a broken branch. A broken branch is, there is a green line, indicating that the wood is dead. However, this dried tree trunk is also flowering in a marvelous way with a pomegranate encircled by heaven fruits and flowers. This dead wood bringing life is the lignum vitae, the cross on which Christ died. Only only with his sacrifice we can attain eternal life, the fruit of eternity. A second branch, which sometimes, but not always, springs from the first, usually sprouts a thistle card. The tormented leaves and sometimes the 5 petal roses, the thistle, this is more clear. The 5 petal rose, the 5 wounds of Christ, remind us that as a real man, Christ suffered true agony and true death. The word of thistle in Italian is cardo, which also means cornerstone and main road in Latin. Christ is the cornerstone on which the church is built, and then the guarantee of redemption and resurrection. In some late versions, the big cardo is encircled by the crown of thorns, like in this piece in Venice. No wonder if these two designs were produced and elaborated in many, many variants all over the century. They appear in many pictures as canopy or cloth of honor behind the Madonna and Child, vestments of angels, martyrs, and donors. Painters, Flemish first of all, liked to paint the most precious effects, like the brocading weft, the different highness of the piles, and so on. It's too much light, you cannot see so well. Huh? But it is difficult to find an exact copy of a real survived velvet with this design, like in this, you can see is a perfect copy of this velvet. Strangely, this kind of velvets doesn't appear in the paintings of Angelico. He had to know very well the beauty, the opulence, the richness of these clothes, not to mention the significance of their design. Nevertheless, velvets are rare in his paintings, even we can trace real allusions to the kind of this production. An example is the asymmetrical structure typical of the most luxurious velvets of the time, painted in some of these cloths of honor, like in the Altare of San Matteo and in the Pala of San Bosco e Frari in the Museo di San Marco in Florence. But Angelico clearly preferred the harmony of the symmetrical design. Extrapolating from the velvets really produced only the central part of the motif, the big inflorescence, allusive of the redemption and resurrection. This is a detail of the coronation of the Virgin of the Louvre. In the real velvets, the symmetrical motifs are always arranged in a check pattern, while Angelico prefers repetitive horizontal and vertical theories of the same circular shape, never found in the survived specimens. Or he created his own pattern, like in this case, preferring among all the possibility offered by real fabric one symbol, the pomegranates. This is in Tabernacolo dei Linaioli in San Marco, which the pomegranates, which he reproduced in a very stylized way. You can see in this cloth of honor. The pomegranate is not only the symbol of resurrection and eternal life. The multitude of seeds in one fruit represent also the communion of saints, and the red juice, the Christ's blood. In which cloth Angelico dressed his saints? In the Cappella Nicolina in Rome, the saint wears a red dalmatic brocaded with a motif of golden flames, symbol of his ardent love and charity, and also reference to the Holy Spirit. The other deacons are draped in blue silk with golden stars, a fabric really produced and well described in the documents of the 14th century. The motifs or flames as the motif of sun rays is recurring in all the textile history, specifically produced for liturgical vestments till almost today. Here we have flames and rays in the two different and this is in Fiesole, Museo Bandini. And this one, for example, the flames in the Pala of Annalena, and also in the gown of this angel in the Annunciation in the little painting in San Marco. But which kind of clothes are wearing the angel and the blessed in heaven? This is in Laverna, and in the dated 1574, flames, of course. Allora, which kind of clothes are wearing the angels and the blessed in heaven? In hell, people is naked like the beasts, but in heaven, their resurrected bodies must be covered. Which kind of material is made their dress of? Silk seems to be perfect. Silk is the most precious and the lightest fabric. It is naturally shining, changing color and reflecting the light. It can be woven with gold, the uncorruptible material symbol of eternity. And how are tailored the dresses of angels and saints? Of course, not in the fashionable way of the 15th century, sported by people in everyday life, or in particularly important occasions like marriage, when luxurious and odd to our eyes apparels could be seen. In the heaven, the tailoring of dresses must be classical, as a softly draped tunic always appears. But the model is not the Roman attire, the real classic tunic. Angels are wearing two dresses, one on the other. What we see is actually an overgown with narrow sleeves and openings at the side of the skirt to reveal the lining and another gown below, both of different color. Sometimes the apparel is completed by a mantle. The model is an old fashion, the fashion of 100 years before. At that time, the overgown was called guarnacca and the undergown gonnella, worn by women and men with few differences. The angel dresses of Angelico are actually very similar to the dresses worn by the dancing girls in the fresco of the Buongoverno painted by Ambrogio Lorenzetti in the Palazzo Pubblico in Siena. The old and not real fabric as cloth of honor painted by Angelico and the old dresses worn in heaven have the same significance, as the annuvolato effect sometimes painted on the floor. Looking at this image, the spectator must be carried away in a world where time and space don't exist, the celestial world. The painter wants to offer the spectator a glimpse of eternity. And I think it is not by chance that Angelico didn't choose to reproduce the textiles of his time, whose motifs were allusive to the sacrifice of Christ, to the life of Christ as a real man. In heaven, actually, there is no need to testify the faith in the sacrifice of the God's Son, the cardo, or main road to heaven. Here, blessed and angels, immersed in the light, in the colors of silk and in splendor of gold, had only to sing forever the glory of God. Thank you.